Okay, where did we stop last time? Who remembers where we stopped?
So we stopped on the natural selection.
Selection pressure.
Okay.
Selection.
Selection.
Okay. Now, the last lesson we had looked at different theories of evolution. We had discussed what we call Lamarck theory of evolution, Darwin's Charles theory of evolution. Sometimes they call theory of natural selection. And lastly, we looked at what we call New Darwinism theory of evolution. We looked at all that, and I know now you can connect one by one and how they are different. We said the reason why people brought the modern theory of evolution, which we call the Neo-Darwinism theory, is due to the shortcomings which came across after Darwin has given his theory. Mainly, some of the shortcomings we looked at, Darwin failed to explain how variation arises, because according to him, he was right that evolution comes as a result of variation, because it is on which natural selection will act. So those individuals with better adapted characteristics will be selected for, and those ones with poor characteristics or less adapted will be selected against. Therefore, that is variation, but he did not explain how variation arises. But the modern scientists tried to explain how that variation arises, by talking about things like random fertilization, crossing over, independent assortment, and mutations. Therefore, in their theory of, it is less the same as that one of Darwin, because all of them they are based on natural selection. They picked the knowledge of Darwin of natural selection, but for them in their theory, they explained how the variations which Darwin was trying to talk about, how they arise. Those are the different. And when you look at the theory, the Neo-Darwinism theory states that new species of organisms are formed from pre-existing ones, because this is evolution due to mutation, crossing over, independent assortment, and random fertilization, on which natural selection acts upon. Because even Darwin had explained that by saying that evolution is due to natural selection, which will act on variations. Just because the difference between the Darwinist theory of evolution and the Neo-Darwinism is because Darwin, in his theory, when he's stating it, he did not talk about the causes of variation. Therefore, that is what we can talk about by Neo-Darwinism, and you read about more it. Now, we had started by looking at what we call natural selection. So that we understand it, because evolution depends mainly on natural selection. Evolution occurs due to natural selection, because this natural selection is the one which is going to act on variations we have in a population, so that we get those ones which are better adapted and those ones which are less adapted. Those ones which are better adapted will interbreed. Those ones which are less adapted will die and fail to reproduce, causing formation of a new species. Because I told you, you need to understand evolution. How do you understand evolution? You don't need to say that we have a different species which will arise. Okay, how can I say that? Like an example, I can say that man will come from a monkey, that a monkey will change into a monkey. A monkey will develop into man. It can never happen. Or man change into a monkey. It can never. Just because, just we shall get a new species of a monkey, which is different from those ones which are already here. It means they changed it by natural selection. Now we need to understand what is natural selection and what it is involved with. But before we go to natural selection, there is a question I want to pose on you. Maybe you can put it down. You can put it down and you will try it out. One says, that question is saying, describe, I'm writing it down. Are you seeing it? Are you seeing what I'm writing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Describe the theories of evolution. The theories of evolution. Roman 1. Inheritance of acquired characteristics and law of use and disuse. Suppose who stated that law? When I say, which law do I want you to state there to describe?
Lamarck's law.
Lamarck's law, because it is in Lamarck where we have that use and disuse. Therefore, at that point, because the question is saying describe, and I told you whenever they say describing any theory, what you have to first do is to state it. It means at this point you will first state Lamarck's law, which states that new species of organisms are formed from pre-existing ones through inheritance of acquired characters arising from overuse or disuse of organisms. That's the law of Lamarck. Therefore, you can state it. That's how you have to state it. With the description, it is all about stating. When they say describe the theory, you have to state it. Therefore, with the Lamarck theory of evolution, we said it states that new species of organisms are formed from pre-existing ones through inheritance of acquired characters. Therefore, Lamarck put emphasis on that inheritance of acquired characters. Therefore, he was telling us that we form new species from pre-existing ones due to inheritance of acquired characters. Those species which are the pre-existing species acquire new characters, which they will pass on to the new generation, and that generation now will have new species which the parents did not have. Therefore, in that case, that's what we call Lamarck. Roman 2, Darwinism or Darwinism. This one is not there. Neo-Darwinism, which states that new species of organisms are formed from pre-existing ones. Are you hearing that new species of organisms are formed from pre-existing ones due to mutation, crossing over, independent assortment, and random fertilization, causing variation on which natural selection? It means in neo-Darwinism, you have to show us how the variation arise. You just state. Then B, someone can say explain. I want you to try these questions. Therefore, I will give you their answers according to what I'm also going to sit down. And put them in writing. Then I will give them to you in the next lesson, which is in Monday. Explain in neo-Darwinism. Then you will mark yourself. explain neodarwinism. That is B. Then C, it is going to just be one question, broad. Describe the process of evolution. Describe the process of evolution. Describe the process of evolution. I need you to write something which can take you like 6 marks, which can earn you like 6 marks. Describe for me how evolution occurs. Read and understand evolution. In that, whenever they say describe the process of evolution, the first statement I will expect you to tell me that evolution occurs as a result of natural selection. That is the first thing. Mainly when they talk about describing evolution, indirectly we are doing neo-Darwinism. Because in neo-Darwinism is where we have elaborate description of all things evolved in evolution. It evolves in neo-Darwinism. We talk about natural selection. We talk about how variation arises and other things. Therefore, in this case, I want you to do those questions and we shall have them. Describe. That's how things will move on. Therefore, we shall look at other questions. I will give others. Now, we need to go. Have you written the questions?
Yes.
Or you're still copying them? Okay. If you have them, then we continue. Now, we are going to look at natural selection. I told you if you to understand the natural selection, you need to first understand these in words separated, natural and selection. We said what is selection? Who can tell me what we say the selection is? What did we say selection is? We said the selection is a process. Selection is a process. Is a process. Where or in which? Where individuals with favorable futures or individuals which are better adapted in a population survive to reproduce, while those ones with unfavorable futures die and are eliminated. Therefore, here in selection is a process where we have two things. One, organisms or individuals with favorable what? Favorable characteristics survive. After surviving, what do? Interbreed. After interbreeding, what happens? Reproduce to pass on their characteristics to the next generation. While those organisms with unfavorable characteristics die and eliminated. Therefore, hope you have seen selection. We are selecting out those individuals with good characteristics. The other ones will not. Therefore, it is a process which involves selections, getting a population and dividing it into two. That is what we call selection. Have we picked the meaning of the word selection?
Yes.
That is what we mean by the word selection. That it involves organisms with favorable characteristics surviving and interbreeding to pass on their characteristics. Like I can give you an example. We have individuals who are sickle-celled. And individuals who are normal. Individuals who are sickle-celled, always the environment selects them against. They will fail to reproduce. They die before the reproductive age. While those ones who are not sickle-celled like you will survive, interbreed, and reproduce, pass on your characteristics to the next generation. While someone who was sickle cell failed to survive, that is what we call selection. He has been selected against, and you have been selected for. Therefore, we have selection for and selection against. Those ones who survive to interbreed, we say they are selected for. Those ones who fail to interbreed and die and are getting eliminated, we say they are selected against. Have you understood what selection means?
Yes.
Now, after selection, we have what we call selection pressure. Selection pressure. What causes some organisms to be selected for, and what causes some organisms to be selected against? Like what causes people who are sickle cell to die, and what causes people who are not sickle cell to survive and reproduce? That is what we call selection pressure. That is the environment. Therefore, when we talk about evolution, there must be selection pressure, which brings about what? Selection. Selection cannot happen when there is no selection pressure. Okelo, you're talking. Therefore, selection pressure, when we talk about selection pressure, in simple terms, our selection pressure, we are going to see that under selection pressure is a particular factor. First of all, you must know it is a factor, environmental factor. It is a particular factor. And is a particular factor existing in the environment, existing or in a population, which determines, therefore, this is the factor which will determine who to survive, who to die, who to be selected for, who to be selected against. Therefore, like an example, I can use an example which we have already talked about, that one of Down, how Down tried to explain the existence of long-necked giraffes. If you have read that work, you'll see how Down tried to explain. He was different from Lamarck. For him, Down, he said that we had both long-necked and short-necked giraffes. But due to drought, the short-necked giraffes were selected against because they could not have food. They lacked food to eat because all the short grass had to dry and they could not reach the trees up. Therefore, they were selected against. It means now, in that example of Down he gave, it is the drought which was the selection pressure. It was the drought which was our selection pressure. Yeah, it was our selection pressure. Therefore, when they talk about selection pressure, is that factor in an environment or in a population? Since we are talking about evolution, we talk about populations. That's why here we are using, is that particular factor existing in a population which determines the survival of an individual. The survival of an individual. When I say the survival of an individual is someone who is being selected for, and the other one who is selected against, the one who is going to die. E.g., predation. Examples of selection pressures. One, we have predation. Predation. We have competition. We have climatic conditions. Climatic conditions. We have overpopulation. We have diseases. An example of sickle cell. Those are some of the examples of selection pressures. Because when they come in like predation, when you get, like I can give you an example of Uganda cobs. When you get where we have a population of Uganda cobs, and you introduce in a lion will start feeding on those cobs. Those ones, the cobs which cannot run fast and escape the lion, they will be selected against because they will be fed on. Because they don't have those characteristics which can make them survive. Therefore, they will die. But those ones which will have characteristics which are better adapted, they can run, they have a good sight, they can run fast, they can camouflage, therefore they will survive. To interbreed, competition, like an example of when you have, I can use some members here in your class, competition here. When you have my friend Okello and Musinguzi, they are all men. They get attracted to Monica. Now they put in the applications. Automatically, we shall have one who will be selected for. Let me assume it's my Okello. Musinguzi will die with his poor genes. Therefore, he's selected against. That is competition. You're competing for a given limited resource. In a competition, we have limited resources. And those limited resources will be competed for. Now, organism, like another example I can use, if you get a tiger and a leopard, and you put them in the same national park where they are Uganda cobs, the leopard will be outcompeted because, first of all, the leopard may not be good at hunting compared to the tiger. It means it has less, its characteristics are not well adapted for the survival. Have you understood what we call selection pressure?
Yes, sir.
Therefore, selection.
Yes, sir.
Selection pressure is that factor in a population which determines the survival of an individual. That this individual is going to survive because it has good characteristics to make him or her compete. While the other one, no, the characteristics, the environment will select against it. Now, after understanding those two words, one, we said selection. Two, we said selection pressure. Now, I'm going to ask, on these two words, on these two things, selection and selection pressure, which acts on which causes the other? Is it selection causing selection pressure, or selection pressure causes selection?
Selection pressure causes selection.
Yes, selection pressure has to come in, then selection then comes after. Okay. Now what we are going to do, if you want to reply, you raise up the hand. I'm seeing you here. I'll always, because you're talking and the sounds are getting reflected, everyone is talking. Therefore, in that case, those are the, you need to understand these things. Now, these two are the ones we combine to get what we call natural selection. Natural selection. Selection. Natural selection comes from selection pressure. Natural comes from selection pressure. Then selection comes from itself. Therefore, we get what we call selection pressure. Natural selection. Therefore, what is natural selection? We have understood natural selection is the one which brings about evolution. Therefore, natural selection is a mechanism, a mechanism of evolution. That's what you have to know. It's a mechanism of evolution. It's the one which leads to evolution. When you look at the theories which are widely accepted in evolution, that is Darwin and New Darwinism theory. They all base the process of evolution on natural selection. Therefore, natural selection is the mechanism of evolution. But what does it involve? Therefore, natural selection involves, then you tell us what does it involves. Therefore, it will involve organisms which are better adapted with favorable characteristics to survive, interbreed, and reproduce more offspring to the next generation. While those ones which are with unfavorable characteristics are selected against, and therefore their population become extinct. They can no longer compete. They can no longer compete. And if they can no longer compete, this means they will be selected against. They can no longer compete within the population. Within the population. People who are sickle cell cannot compete with you who are normal. In terms of even work, everything. In terms of surviving the environmental conditions, they will be whipped out. It means natural selection has worked on us. It has selected, nature has selected who to survive with better characteristics. That's why I'm telling you, nature can select you out. And when nature selects you out, you have nothing remaining. Therefore, make sure nature does not select you out. Make sure you get those futures. I always tell my candidates, mainly in senior 6, most of you come in senior 5 when you have distinctions and good credits. But nature of biology in A level will select you out because you fail to fit in it. You fail to recognize what you have to do, that you have to have serious concentration and reading. Not that reading of O level, but more time is needed to create more time. Therefore, that is what we call nature selection, natural selection. Therefore, natural selection is a mechanism of evolution whereby organisms with favorable characteristics are selected for. With favorable characteristics are selected for to interbreed and reproduce, to pass on their genes to the next generation. It means for them, they will be increasing. They will not die. Even the next generation will have them. While those ones with unfavorable characteristics are selected against, and their population become extinct. They become extinct. Therefore, in this case, that's what we talk about natural selection. That's what we refer to as natural selection. Have you understood what we refer to as natural selection? Yes? Have you understood what we mean by natural selection?
Yes, teacher.
Okay, we leave that alone. We leave that alone. We leave that alone. Now, someone can say, you know, you after understanding these things, you need to sit down and analyze them. Someone can ask you a question: what is the role of natural selection? Describe the role of natural selection. Therefore, the importance of natural selection, the only importance of natural selection sets in what? Selection pressure. Natural selection is able to bring out evolution, or to bring about evolution, because the environment, nature sets in what we call selection pressure. Therefore, whenever someone talks about the role of natural selection, you have to describe it in terms of selection pressure. Therefore, the role of natural selection is that it sets in selection pressure. Which selection pressure? We say the selection pressure acts on what? If selection pressure is to bring about variation, it acts on what? It acts on variation Z. It means my process of evolution is going to start from here. 1, there must be natural selection. Natural selection. Then this natural selection sets in what? We said natural selection brings about what?
Selection pressure.
Sets in selection pressure. Selection pressure. After setting in selection pressure, this selection pressure acts on what? Acts on
Variation.
variations. So that after acting on variations, we shall have now dividing these variations. Someone has. Therefore, we shall have those ones which are better adapted will survive to interbreed and reproduce personally. Those ones which are less adapted will die. The less adapted ones will die. Therefore, then leading to these ones which are better adapted, it means they will have gone under what we call evolution, because they have survived, they have got better characteristics. Therefore, that's how the process occurs. Therefore, evolution will always start with the natural selection. Why natural selection? Because natural selection will set in selection pressure. After setting in selection pressure, what will selection pressure act? Selection pressure will act on variations. But you need to know how these variations come. We said these variations arise as a result of mutation, crossing over, independent assortment, and random fertilization. Then in these variations, we shall have those ones which are better adapted and those ones which are less adapted. Those ones which are better adapted will survive to interbreed, to pass on their characteristics to the next generation. These ones will die, the less adapted. It means the next generation will only have those organisms which are better adapted. It means now it will be different species from these ones which were less adapted, which had to die. It means we have got now a new species. It means evolution has occurred. Have you connected now between natural selection and evolution? It means evolution to occur, we need natural selection. Therefore, natural selection will set in to cause selection pressure. And when the selection pressure is set in, we have already variations already in that population, because variations come as a result of the other ones. But if there are no variations, even if you have natural selection, it means selection pressure, the environmental factors have nothing to act on. All the individuals are the same. That's why we say variation is important in causing evolution. That is the most important point of it. Because even if natural selection is there, variation and no varying in the population, it means evolution will not take place. Therefore, the role of natural selection is to set in selection pressure on variations, on which organisms which are with better variants will be selected for to pass on their genes to the next generation, while those ones which are less adapted die, hence changing. Something I will not talk about, which we shall look about, which we call allele frequency. Since we are still in the introduction, we are bringing in one by one. Now, allele frequency, we first leave it. Have you understood what we call natural selection in relation to evolution? I'm waiting for any question. Caroline is raising up the hand. Please. Now, Lule.
Yes, teacher, I have a question. You've said that selection pressure acts on natural selection.
A selection pressure
But
acts
at
on.
first- You said selection pressure comes after natural selection.
No, these two things are inseparable.
Okay.
Yes. Natural selection is the one which brings about selection pressure. Because selection pressure is as a result of the environment. Therefore, you don't need to say, you don't need to think that this one is independent and the other one is independent. Those two are together. They move together. When there is natural selection, it means there is selection pressure occurring. It means because, you know, natural selection, we are selecting out the better adapted and those ones which are less adapted. But it will be done by selection pressure. It means you cannot separate the two.